Morning, everyone. So, yes, weirdly, with everything else going on, weirdly, the big news yesterday was really sort of Liz Truss, but it sort of keeps going because hideous level of hypocrisy. So, for those who may not know, I'm sure most people do know, sort of yesterday, but sort of the night before, basically, Liz Truss is out trying to sell her book. And she was at this event. Obviously, you can tell it's a hugely posh event because she's sat at a table. What's the best way for me to move? She sat at a basic table with a crap tablecloth over it, with just a black curtain behind her, basic stage. As if, I mean, I've seen better setups for like mystics and mediums. But anyway, she's there. I'll tell you a picture I haven't put on, I probably should have done. There's a guy sat next to her. If you look this up, if you look up other pictures, right, you can see she's got a co-host there who's put absolutely zero effort into being there. And he's most of the time actually slouched on his chair, arse well forward of the back of the chair, with his hands in his pockets, looking ridiculously bored with the whole thing. There was one, just before the banner came down, there was one bit where she was saying, because I'm going to emphasize the fact that she is, she's just jumping on bandwagons here, because I'm going to explain exactly how we know this. So she thought, she clearly thought she was losing the audience a bit. So she had to announce that she's a Trump supporter, right? And they went, oh, great. And then the guy suddenly woke up and went, oh, I've got some questions about that. And then went back to having his hands in his pockets. So then the banner comes down. Now, this was installed by Led by Donkeys. Now, they've done something similar before. You may remember that at a Reform UK rally during the general election campaign, they did it to Nigel Farage. His banner had a picture of Vladimir Putin with a thing saying, I love Nigel, I think it may have been. As if, it was Putin's endorsement of Farage, which is not an unreasonable thing to say, given the massive army of Russian bots that was deployed in favour of Reform UK and their talking points during the general election campaign. And, of course, the massive army of Russian bots that was deployed during the recent far-right riots. But anyway, this banner, I'm also going to point out, I pointed this out in my video on my own channel yesterday, Led by Donkeys must have a very quiet motor, because when it happened to Nigel Farage, he did not notice. People in the audience had to point it out to him. When it happened with Liz Truss, she didn't notice, nor did her co-host. I think it's quite remarkable to be able to bring something down so smartly and they don't hear anything. I'm quite impressed. But anyway, down it came. They didn't have a clue. A picture of the lettuce with I crashed the economy. Now, I will just point out, she didn't, by the way, crash the economy. She often says, well, that's not fair. I didn't crash the economy. No, it's perfectly true. She didn't crash the economy. She crashed the pound. She crashed the money markets. She blew a permanent, because people say, oh, well, the pound recovered. Yeah, but people's pension pots didn't. So she blew a permanent hole in people's pension pots. And because of the extra increase in interest rates were going up anyway. They would have gone up anyway, but they went up more than would have been the case as a result of this market crash. Therefore, she also added a significant amount onto many people's mortgage repayments as well. And that is also permanent. Even when mortgage rates come down, the extra amount people have had to pay is still permanent. So she's caused permanent damage to the economy. If you want to be technical, she didn't technically crash it because GDP didn't crash. She wasn't in power long enough. But anyway, so her reaction, Nigel, now, unfortunately, this is how bad Liz Truss is. She's actually going to make me praise both Donald Trump and Nigel Farage, which is utterly ridiculous. But here we go. Nigel Farage, when it happened to him, obviously wasn't happy. But he carried on. He didn't scuttle away. She got up. When it was pointed, some guy had to come off stage. And she said, he pointed it out to her and she looked and she said, that's not funny. And she buggered off. I mean, she could have just made a joke of it herself. Because the weird thing is, and this is where the hypocrisy comes into it, she just before this event was going on about freedom of speech and freedom of speech is so important. And specifically, Elon Musk's interpretation of freedom of speech, which is the freedom to say whatever you like in whatever space you like without worrying about the consequences, which is also hypocritical from Elon Musk as well, because he does suppress freedom of speech on Twitter, just not when it's far right free speech. He suppresses other outlets. I actually gathered, although I didn't actually see this myself, so it didn't last very long if it happened, that he even silenced Larry the Cat briefly. But the point is that she was going on about how important Elon Musk's interpretation of freedom of speech was. And, you know, this idea of like responsibility is absolute nonsense. Even though Elon Musk took the piss out of her. Before this event, Elon Musk earlier this week described Liz Truss in not very complimentary tones, and he called her Liz Lettuce Truss. So she was backing Elon Musk, who had just ridiculed her, showing that she's basically got no dignity. Because you wouldn't do that, would you? You wouldn't back someone who just like attacked you. You would go, even if you agreed with them or something, you would say, well, if you're just going to attack me, you fight your own corner. So she's just jumping on bandwagons. But here's what she tweeted out. She made it even worse. Like, so first of all, if it just came down, it's happened, right? It's going to be in the news. It's happened. It's done. Remember, there are some politicians who actually get things thrown at them. I don't just mean milkshakes. You'll get all sorts thrown on them. They don't make a massive fuss about it. It's not. I don't think that's right, by the way. I don't think it's right to throw anything, even if it's not harmful. But it's not a big deal. But she first of all, she stormed off. She should have just said, "Oh, very good. Yes, how fun." And she should have just carried on and let stagehands bugger about with it. But you know what? She went off. But then she made it even worse because she tweeted out. I'm going to read it out. Her tweet. She said, "What happened last night was not funny. It just makes it funnier." Sorry. She said, "Far left activists." This is led by donkeys, by the way. I mean, they're probably like, I think it's probably fair to say they're left wing. I don't know them personally. I don't think they're far left now. But anyway, far left activists, she probably can't tell the difference. Far left activists disrupted the event, which then had to be stopped for security reasons. It's like, no, it didn't have to be stopped for security reasons. It was a banner coming down, right? Nigel Farage didn't get whisked off stage, did it? Go, oh, it could be a bomb hiding in the paper. There could be a bomb, Nigel. We've got to get off stage. No, he carried on, right? He carried on. And here's where I'm going to have to praise Trump. Sorry, it's probably the first and last time I'll ever do it. Donald Trump, the orange one himself, who is incredibly thin-skinned, he showed more dignity after he'd literally been shot at. Someone had actually tried to kill him. And he showed more dignity after that event than she showed when someone pulled down a little banner with a picture of a lettuce on it. A lettuce with googly eyes. And I crashed the economy. I mean, how bad do you have to be where you look like more of a snowflake than Nigel Farage and Donald Trump combined? Katrina there saying Rishi Sunak is far left according to them. Well, that's where it all gets really weird. I mean, you have it both ways as well. You know, you'll have people who are actually on the far left who describe like the Labour leadership as right wing. And it's like, no, you're just so far to the left and so pure in your attitude that literally anyone to the right of you is considered right wing. Because these people think, or they like to give the impression they think they're in the centre. Except it's always weird because the far right often try to claim that they're centre right. Whereas the far left never do. The far left go, oh, no, I'm very left wing. It's like, okay, so these guys are actually just centre left. They're right wing. Like literally anyone to the right of them is right wing. And yet they don't try and claim they're centre left themselves. It's like, so what's between you and the centre then? Name me someone that's between you and the centre. It's like really weird. But anyway, then she said, I'm going to carry on because that's not the end of her tweet. Although I will say it ended up, my response to it, when she said, the event had to be stopped for security reasons. I retweeted it and said, no, it wasn't stopped for security reasons. It was stopped for insecurity reasons. And it's like one of my most viewed tweets for ages again. But that's what it was. It was her insecurity that stopped that event. There was nothing. She could have just gone there. In fact, I had someone put a comment on my channel, which was really good. She could have Anatoly's just like saying, I would describe Salman as centre-right. He's absolutely not centre-right. He's nowhere near the right. He's very left. His government is centre-left. Remember, someone who wants to win power does not do everything they want to do. Because then if you're not where voters are, because then that's like saying you can never have someone who's quite left-wing run the government, which is ridiculous. Keir Starmer's past shows he is actually, I mean, I'm sure he's travelled. He used to be a Trotskyite. That's how left-wing he was. He's not anymore. I'm quite sure he's travelled nearer the centre. But his government is centre-left, and he himself is definitely left-wing. Utterly ridiculous to suggest otherwise when you look at not only the policies of the government so far, but also, his own attitude to various things. But anyway, never mind. But that is just this thing. Everyone perceives themselves on this one-dimensional line, and they can't. There's no depth perception on it to a lot of people. But anyway, she goes on. It's like 20 minutes in. I've only got halfway through this tweet. She says, this is done to intimidate people and suppress free speech. Oh, apparently, if you hold up a political image, you're trying to suppress free speech. They didn't do anything. They didn't interrupt her. I would argue that if they jumped on stage and threw glitter all over her, you could argue that would be trying to suppress free speech. But no one did that. It was, as I've pointed out, a quiet. If no one had pointed out to her, she would never have known it even happened, right? They quietly brought down a banner. That's not suppressing free speech. That is itself an act of free speech, a very harmless act of free speech. She could have brushed it off. Politicians brush these things off all the time. She could have just carried on. Granted, she would have wanted someone to try and remove it if they could. I will accept it wouldn't have been easy. They might have needed like a hook to try and tear it down. That probably would have looked quite undignified. There's nothing to stop her carrying on. She says, I won't stand for it. Well, she did stand for it. She stood up and walked out. Then she said, would we see the same reaction if the activists were far right? Well, we know what would happen if these activists were far right. They would try and murder her. Can we remind ourselves that far right activists have murdered 2 sitting MPs in the last decade? That's what far right activists have attempted to murder people in hotels, staff and residents alike. Far right activists have succeeded in destroying public property. That's what far right activists do. So when she says, would we see the same reaction if the activists are far right? No, because the far right activists do not quietly. Well, some do. Okay, there are some people on the far right who will peacefully protest. That's fine. No one. You just walk past their banner and go, I don't agree with that, and carry on your day. That's fine. That's not a problem. The problem is that the far right do cause destruction of public property, and they do cause an attempt to cause physical and mental harm to people. What they don't do is deploy a silent, amusing banner. If that's all that they did, if that was the worst form of political protest, do you know what? The world would be a much nicer place, don't you think? And that's not the end of her hypocrisy as well. I want to remind people of a few things. First of all, when Liz Truss, this great champion of free speech, who is so much of a champion of free speech that she's appalled at a silent example of speech that didn't even interrupt her. Remember, what interrupted her was some guy coming off stage to point it out to her. She didn't even know it was there. When she was running for Tory leader in 2022, she made it publicly and explicitly clear that any Tory MPs who did not publicly back her would not get a job in her government. And when she won and formed her government, she doubled down on it. She made it known that Grant Shapps, for example, who was quite a senior Tory, and she didn't find room for him in her in her cabinet, and she made a point of saying to him, but in a public way, the reason. She actually praised him by saying he was very competent, which actually is of course, it was another bit of a joke. But by Tory standards at the time, he probably was. She actually said publicly that she would absolutely have put him in the cabinet because he's competent enough to be there, but she wouldn't because he didn't back her. That is suppression of free speech. That is what you'd call suppression of free speech. Deliberately keeping someone that you are claiming is competent out of a position of government because they wouldn't back you. So she's a total hypocrite, absolute hypocrite. And the reason why she's jumping on this free speech bandwagon now is because that's what it is. She's blown it in the UK. I cannot for the life of me work out why the billionaire-backed think tanks are still trying to use her as some sort of asset. She's completely blown it in this country. So she's trying to get in good with MAGA America, right? That is why she did that thing with Steve Bannon, where, she was a champion of free speech then. She allowed Steve Bannon to call Tommy Robinson a hero and said nothing. And she, but that's why, just if you watch the video just before this banner came down, she feels, I mean, you can tell she sort of feels she's losing the crowd. So she has to mention she's a Trump supporter because she's just trying to appeal to the crowd she's got. But all she's trying to do is sell her book. That's all she's trying to do. She's trying to retain some level of relevance. She's no longer an MP. She's got no elected office. She's got money for life to run an office, so she can afford to pay staff, but she can't actually, she doesn't hold elected office. She's not realistically going to in this country unless the Tories give her a really safe seat. And I'm not sure they'd want to, but if they want to, that's up to them. So she's trying to make it in MAGA America. And she'll just go along with anything. She's a complete hypocrite. A complete hypocrite. But she is, at least now that she can no longer do direct harm to us, she is at least an entertaining hypocrite. Frank saying Liz Truss is a first-class narcissist. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm quite sure she is. But I just cannot get over how thin-skinned she is. I mean, remember, she is also the person whom Dominic Cummings, of all people, said she was the most properly nuts minister he'd ever met or ever had dealings with. So even by Dominic Cummings standards, and he was backing Boris Johnson, Liz Truss was considered absolutely crazy. Ivan Ambrose, 999, £10 super chat, thank you very much. She said, that's not funny. No, what was funny was the biggest economic incompetence and economic failures of the Tories since the ERM crisis of the early 1990s when John Major was Prime Minister. Well, the thing with the John Major as Prime Minister, I mean, none of that, I mean, that was not on this level, because what Liz Truss did was to deliberately allow her Chancellor to announce a completely unfunded budget. I mean, it was a budget statement rather than a full budget, but a completely unfunded budget was heralded without any report from the OBR. So with no analysis of it at all. It was just, we're going to pull these levers without working out what they're going to do in advance. That was what it was. And the reaction was very predictable. And yet the newspapers try and say, oh no, it's the Bank of England's fault, stuff like that. And it's like, no, the crash happened before Kwasi Kwarteng even put his arse back down on the seat, before the Bank of England did anything. But I have comments sometimes when I bring it up and they go, oh no, the bad stuff happened because of what the Bank of England did. So the Bank of England didn't do anything to begin with. They acted quite, they acted just to stop a run on the pound. If they'd have literally done nothing, we'd have had a run on the pound. We'd have known about it then. Then people would have been moaning, why didn't the Bank of England do anything? Billy Kershaw said, then Phil, how many ice creams with flakes? I don't know what that's a reference to. Although you struggle to get ice creams with flakes these days, because I happen to know this is from last year. I don't go out and get 99s these days, but I happen to know from last year the flakes that are delivered to ice cream sellers these days, they sort of come from Turkey, and they're now quite poor quality. They say when they arrive, loads of them are broken, they're unusable. They're all crap. So, ice creams, 99 ice creams, a bit of a problem now. God knows how much they cost. Do you know, it missed me by as well. When I was a kid, I don't know why they were ever called 99s. They were never 99p. I suppose at some point they would have been. But when I was a kid, they didn't cost 99p. and they must cost much more than 99p now. So I'll have missed the point where they actually cost 99p. Anyway, Scott Walton, another 9.99 super chat. I could say it this time. I had practice. Rory Stewart slates her in his book, An Unrested Politics is Politics All the Time. She's very inept and lazy. I mean, we know she's inept because she can get nothing right, literally nothing right. You know, before she became Prime Minister, I mean, I would say on the channel, a lot of people may not have seen just how bad she was, because most people, if they see anything in politics, like the big debates, like the big national, the ones that have the benches packed out. But I watched some parliamentary debates with secretaries of state where there's not many people in the chamber. And she was, you know, turned over every time, whether it was when she was running DEFRA or, you know, the business department, doesn't matter. Every single time she was really turned over. She's incapable of, I mean, she was stitched up by the Russian foreign minister when she was foreign secretary. She's utterly terrible. She's terrible in interviews. And the problem, I tell you, the problem she has is when you say she's a narcissist, which again, I've no doubt she is, but I'm not qualified to say. But unfortunately, her brain doesn't really account for it in the way that Boris Johnson's does, because Boris Johnson is a much more obvious narcissist. But he warps reality. So he doesn't get caught out because he just carries on with this weird vision of reality. Whereas she didn't. She gets caught out. It's like her part of her brain's grounded in reality. So when you catch her out, she hesitates because she knows she's been caught out. She can't just go with it. That's why you get all the awkward pauses and things like that. She's got a really weird brain. It's like it's in two bits, maybe a narcissist bit where she wants this reality to be true, but then the other bit that's sort of saying to it, no, but this isn't true, Liz, you can't say that. So then she ends up hesitating all the time. Pollinator, another £10 super chat, thank you. If Truss keeps up her attention seeking, could the Tory party tell her to shut up and disappear if it's seen she's actively turning new voters off their party, or even if it's just thought to be the case? Well, I mean, this is the thing, and I mentioned this in my own stream last night, didn't I? Part of the Conservatives' problem is, like, they keep saying things like, or like Tom Tugendhat's been saying things like, well, we need to do what Keir Starmer did. You know, he turned the Labour Party from this absolutely disastrous result in 2019 to this massive majority in 2024. You know, he's basically saying, well, if he could do it with the Labour Party, I can do it with the Tory party. And it's like, in theory, actually, there are various things where you'll struggle. But in theory, sure. But then what were the things that Starmer did in Labour? One of the things he did was be very open about what was the toxic legacy of the Labour Party. And for the Conservatives, they have a toxic legacy. It's not so much centred around personalities as it was for Labour, but it is. But where there is a toxic legacy around personalities, Liz Truss is one of them. The Tory party have an easier job in that Liz Truss lost her seats. That's actually made things easier for them. But they are going to have to make it clear that they reject her politics and her economics. Because if they don't, then yes, there is a huge danger the Tory party will not. If they don't address that, then they're screwed. They have to make it clear that they reject Liz Truss's economics at the very least, if not politics in general. It's easier to do that because she's no longer part of the party. She doesn't speak for the party anymore. I mean, she's a member. I assume she's still a member of the party, but she's not. You say the main thing Starmer did was not being a Tory. No, that wasn't enough. The Tories were very unpopular in 2019 as well. In fact, the Tories crashed to a level of unpopularity in 2019 that they also experienced this year. But Labour were not the beneficiaries because Labour were also clearly not Tories, but didn't do them any good because they were not seen as being any better. No, there was a hell of a lot of work had to go on in the Labour Party and to connect to voters. It wasn't simply enough to not be a Tory. Yes, you know, if you know, it wasn't like specifically Labour. If the Lib Dems had been in the position to realistically win enough seats to form a government, then people, yes, would have more voted for Lib Dem. But it's not. People will keep saying things like, oh, you know, oppositions don't win, governments lose. It's like, no, it's both. Obviously, people are not going to go for an unknown over a government they're sort of happy with. Even if they sort of think things could be better, it's better the devil you know. But they will. So the government have to be seen as in some major way failing. But they were in 2019 as well. I mean, think back to the 2019 general election. There were people, because it was in December, so it was in the middle of an NHS winter crisis. There were people, sick, injured people, lying, not stuck in waiting rooms for hours, not on a trolley in corridors, on the floor. There were people in hospital, ill, injured, lying on the floor because there weren't even enough trolleys left. And that was in the news during the 2019 general election. That should have made it impossible for the government to win. And yet they won a massive majority. Not as big as the one we just had. So no, you have to be the credible alternative. And Labour were not that. So they had to be made a credible alternative. It really wasn't enough just to be not the Tories. That just doesn't happen. Labour were not the Tories in 1992. The Tories were deeply unpopular in 1992. But people had it in their heads that Neil Kinnock was somehow unsuitable as a Prime Minister. And he owns up to that. He admits that. He says that is because, in his words, he was Marmite. But, but what is ridiculous is that the Tories ever made Liz Truss their leader in the first place. Because MP, although it was, okay, from most MPs would have thought, well, actually, we wanted Rishi Sunak to start with. Even though he wasn't brilliant either, but granted, they had slim pickings. But they still allowed her to go on the ballot. They allowed her to go on the ballot, knowing that the members would probably, because the members will almost always pick the craziest option. And they must have known she was useless. They would have seen it. They would have seen it everywhere. So, yeah, I just can't understand why anyone still backs her. I can understand these right-wing think tanks trying to push what we now call Trussonomics, this low regulation, low tax, small state, because that's what they want. It's what they've always wanted. It's what they've wanted for years. But I don't understand why they're still tying themselves to Liz Truss, because they will never get it. Because I'll tell you what happens. All Labour have to do, I'm not saying all they have to do to win the next election. Obviously, it's more complex than that. But in terms of this, all Labour have to do at the next election is accuse the Tories of having the economic policies of Liz Truss. You know how the Tories all through the last Parliament kept breaking the emergency glass on the Jeremy Corbyn defence. They just kept bringing up Jeremy Corbyn, all the way through, whenever they wanted to attack Labour. Oh, Jeremy Corbyn. Labour can do that with Liz Truss. They can absolutely do that. If the Tories start to adopt policies again that sound like low regulation, low tax, they can just say they're still backing Trussonomics. That's all they have to do. Because then that forces the Tories to do one of two things. Either they have to say, yeah, there's nothing wrong with their economic policies, in which case the public will go, yeah, we think there were. Because although that I crashed the economy is not strictly fair, the public believe it. If you say to an average voter, did Liz Truss crash the economy? They will say yes. It's not strictly true. But as far as people are concerned, it is. And because people don't like, because when you say crash the economy, what you should really mean is GDP crashed. That's what you really literally mean. But people just think, if you do some financial harm to the country, that is the same as crashing the economy, right? As far as people are concerned. Gadget Photos, £5 super chat. Thank you. Keep the good work up, Phil. I will attempt to do so. That's one option. One option is for the Conservatives to go, yeah, absolutely. Liz Truss's economic ideas were essentially sound. At which point the public will go, well, we're not going to vote for you, you lunatics. Or they have to disown her. So I think Labour, they don't have to do it now. There's no need to do it now. But at some point, as we get close to the next election, they should absolutely wheel out the Liz Truss defence or attack, or however you want to describe it. They should absolutely wheel it out. They should say, and it doesn't matter whether it's strictly speaking Trussonomics anyway, they should just do it anyway, no matter what the Tories, when they've got their new leader, in place and they start to firm up their policies, whatever they are, accuse them of trying to bring back Liz Truss economics, Trussonomics. Just say it. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It's irrelevant whether it's true, because it forces the Tories and the Tory media to do one of two things: either to say yes, and that's what we want, but it's not what the public want, or to say no, this is nothing like that, and to have to disown Liz Truss, which will cause a row within the Tory party. So Labour should 100% do that. Farage was a fan of Trussonomics. Yes, of course he was. He said it was the best budget since like 1980, whatever the hell, didn't he? Since Thatcher's days. That's what he said. He said it's the best one with since Thatcher's days. They loved it. The Telegraph loved it. They all loved it. They all thought it was fantastic. Pay no attention to the fact that the pound literally crashed before Kwasi Kwarteng had even finished speaking, or the signs were there that was what was happening to it. But there we go. But we have sort of come out of time there. Thanks very much for coming on. It is. I am at least pleased that people like Liz Truss are now more pure entertainment as opposed to evil murder clowns. But there are still some evil murder clowns about, including Nigel Farage himself. But there we go. Tories will be scrutinising Project 25. Yeah, well, yeah, in their case, it's Project 2030. I mean, this is why we need to not let them back in. It's why we need electoral reform, top of anything else. There are some things that some people will consider more urgent, like media reform and stuff like that. But in actual fact, if you had electoral reform, it's not only easier to get, but it then makes it easier for all the other, like probably 24 reforms you need. But there it is anyway. Colin saying, I wonder how different things would have been if they'd made Penny Mordaunt leader. She was impressive in the comments. I don't think so. Classy in her concession speech. Yeah, she's not crazy. That's basically Penny Mordaunt's chief tool. She's not crazy, but she's not competent either. She wouldn't have done the unfunded budget. So Liz Truss did do material and permanent damage to the Tories' reputation. That's absolutely true. But would Penny Mordaunt have been better than Rishi Sunak? I suspect not. I don't think she's a competent politician either. I mean, but it's one of those things we'll never know. I certainly don't think she will ever go there. But there we go. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a great day. Don't forget to subscribe and click the like button, as always. And until next time, I'll see you later.